Hi, welcome back to the AI4India podcast. And today we have a very special guest with us, one of the co founders of Deep Tech for Bharat Foundation, the organization behind AI4India, Shashi Shekhar Vempati. Today, since we have him with us, we're going to deep dive into the history of AI for India, why it was formed, and what the larger mission is. So, sir, thank you so much for joining us. And I'd love to know, how you and Mr. Agrawal got together to start this organization, and what the larger vision behind it was.
Sure, thank you, and great to be on this podcast. I've been on different podcasts, but this is an AI for India podcast, so I think it's basically homecoming. So just to rewind back to the background of how AI for India came together. Uh, so uh, so when I was in fact, even before I became the CEO of Prasar Bharati, it was 2016. Uh, this was around the time when AI once again started to make mainstream news, and uh, and at that time, Carnegie India wanted me to author a paper on what should India be doing. This is 2016 that we are talking about, right? Well before ChatGPT and all this current hype and the buzz. So at that time, the paper was written by me on AI and what should India's strategy be. And one of the things that I had pointed out back then was that India has always taken leapfrogs in adopting new technology. When something like AI, since we are way behind the rest of the world, we have a different strategy where we can leapfrog and catch up with the world, and that requires both the public sector and the private sector to come together. So that was a paper that was written in 2016. Then around 2018, when I was the CEO of Prasar Bharati, at that time, the India International Center, they come up with this quarterly uh, journal. And at that time, by then, the government had instituted two initiatives. There was one committee led by Mr. Nandan Nilekani under, I think, the Commerce Ministry, which was to look at, what should India be doing from an AI standpoint in the startup space and in the commerce space. Second was Niti Aayog had also, at that time under Mr. Amitabh Kant, they had put together a strategy document on what should India's AI strategy. So IIC wanted me to, since it was 2-3 years since my first paper had been written, take a look at both these things and then give us a perspective on, what is India's grand strategy for AI or what should its approach. So that was written in 2018. Okay. And then,
This was 2 years after your Rani paper.
2 years after. And then, of course, things were happening when I was at Prasar Bharati and the COVID happened. One of the initiatives that happened during that period was an MOU that was signed between Prasar Bharati and IIT Kanpur on a number of technology areas. And one of them was that we will make available our entire archives of Doordarshan and All India Radio, the video and the audio archives, to IIT Kanpur to build some models, algorithms and so on. So much before what is now Datadaan, we had already attempted something along those lines, right, back in 2019-20. So that also happened, and then of course, then my term at Prasar Bharati ended. Uh, that was around the time the entire buzz around AI became mainstream. Because until then, AI was being talked about. Because as you would, if anyone who's seen the literature would know that AI went through a very long period of what is called the AI winter in the 1970s, 80s, and hardly any progress happened. The space kind of stalled. Then there was a second coming in the 15-16 time frame. And one of the reasons for that was that the silicon chips became much more capable. There, as we started to pack more and more transistors, more and more computing power came to the silicon chips. So chips became better. Second was cloud computing, right? You had this explosion of being able to use cloud capacity to be able to access computing power for various applications. So I think the convergence of these two kind of gave AI its second life or second homecoming in that sense. Uh, but it was still not mainstream. It was still within enterprises, within startups, within labs, using AI for various things. Of course, there are many consumer applications where we were already using AI, but without being aware of it, right? Being like your Netflix recommendations or your YouTube recommendations, Alexa, very restrictive, but still it was an intelligent interface, Siri, or all of these. The big shift, of course, happened in the 22-23 timeframe when ChatGPT kind of became popular and mainstream. And the big shift there, of course, was the this whole transformer architecture and language models, large language models, where you added this chat interface with which anyone could interact with AI, and I think that is a big shift. And unlike in the case of Alexa or Siri, where you had a very limited vocabulary, very limited set of things that you could talk to or get it to do, here it was open because it was a large language model. You could practically say anything and get an intelligent response, right? And that kind of made it very viral and so on. So one of the worries, in fact, this was an issue that I flagged when way back in 2016 and then subsequently, was a worry that as these big tech platforms are becoming more and more powerful, the Indian context is being lost. And you could see that with a lot of the initial controversies around ChatGPT, right? That whether it came to questions of related to India, it related to all sorts of cultural issues, Indian gods, all kinds of absurd responses. And it was very clear that the model was trained largely on data that was available on the internet and mostly from the Western perspective, right? So clearly there was a gap there that these models were not reflecting our nuances, our knowledge systems, our values, and our languages. So that was one concern. Second big concern, which is also something that I flagged in 2016, is that a lot of these foundational technologies, India is losing out, right? We are largely a consumer of these technologies. We are not the creator of these technologies. And China had caught up by then in a big way. In fact, I recall one of the triggers for that 2016 paper was how a large part of the Chinese origin diaspora from Silicon Valley went back to China to help their industry build AI. One of the most well-known names from that period is this professor from Stanford called Andrew Ng, who also runs this very popular machine learning courses on Coursera.
Okay.
And he had gone back to China to work with Baidu and help build their capability with so on. So it was a very well-known example, and there were many such people. And so clearly, China was catching up and getting ahead, and India did not. In fact, we probably produce the greatest volume of talent. Most of the Silicon Valley tech sector is populated by people from India, Indian origin. Yet we have not seen that same movement back then, and so that was the other concern, that foundational technologies are not being built in India, and we need a different approach. So both these concerns kind of coalesced around what will it take to build AI in India for the Indian context. How do we give strength to our startups? How do we catch up and get ahead of this race? So in the process, we started conversing with different startups and different researchers. And at that time, what I realized in 22-23 was that almost everyone was grappling with the same questions, but they were trying to solve them individually. And clearly, these required a collective effort. There was no way these things could have been solved by themselves. So that was kind of the genesis, to identify what are those common challenges where we need a forum to bring people together so that AI can be built in India for India.
Fair enough. And on this journey, I think one of the major focus areas has been on collecting localized data and trying to bring those data sets to companies and see how they can utilize them to create innovations for India. So have you, even the Prime Minister has spoken about this, of course, at the AI Actually Summit and other platforms. But have you seen any progress at large in the ecosystem in terms of localized data and addressing shortcomings that Western models might have vis-a-vis India?
Sure. So, in fact, when we started conversing with our ecosystem, of startups and researchers, the two challenges became very apparent at that point in time. The first challenge was on access to these high-performance computing infrastructure, the GPUs. Right? Yeah, India was GPU poor, and maybe to some extent continues to be. But I think the government, especially the India AI mission, which came about in the last year and a half or so, has addressed this to a large extent by creating this public compute infrastructure impaneling different infrastructure providers, where if you are a startup or you're a researcher, you could apply and get access to subsidized GPUs so that your compute uh, issue is solved. Of course, there's not nowhere near what Elon Musk has amassed, or what Microsoft has put together in terms of compute capacity. When they are doing it in the hundreds of thousands to close to a million, we are still catching up. We are in the tens of thousands, right? But we'll get there. So compute is getting better. That was the first challenge. The second challenge, of course, was data. That in the absence of publicly accessible data sets in the Indian context, where it could be Indian languages, it could be Indian imagery, it could be India-specific data points in various industries, various domains. The fact that these were not available was a big gap for our startups to build models in the Indian context. Because a lot of the open source models that are out there have largely been trained on what is available on the internet. And as you know, on the internet, predominantly the data that is out there is from the Western sources. A large part of Indian language data, for example, is not even digitized. Right? When we made the AIR archive available, it was perhaps one of the first such efforts in terms of giving a digital footprint to a large number of languages and dialects in India, which otherwise are don't have any internet presence. In fact, the Prime Minister Modi's Mann Ki Baat is the starting point for a lot of these machine language models. Because if you look at it, Mann Ki Baat is very unique, right? It is broadcast initially in Hindi, which the Prime Minister speaks in. But then it is also translated and broadcast in 20 plus the official languages and several dialects. So nearly about 45 languages and dialects. Each episode of Mann Ki Baat is broadcasted. So what that gives you is a very highly authentic data set of very high fidelity, where you have the base in Hindi and then you have the multiple language versions. So that makes it very amenable to train models and build models. And some of the earliest work in India on building such language models between, I think, IIT Kanpur and IIT Hyderabad was based on the Mann Ki Baat corpus. In fact, it's something that I mentioned in my book as well on Mann Ki Baat. So a lot of these efforts were already underway. Where Datadaan comes in is, can we make it a bigger movement, right? Because it's not enough for one organization, one individual to make the data sets. We need a diversity of Indian data sets to be accessible. And if you look at the way OpenAI and some of these big guys have gone about training their models, the ethics are highly questionable, and which is what you're now seeing being litigated in the Indian courts, where ANI and some of the others have taken them to court. Even in the US, there are a couple of court cases where I think they've settled it. They come up with some commercial arrangements, so that they don't have to fight the battle in the court. But the reality is, the large language models have been trained on content on the internet without paying attention to copyrights, and perhaps largely violating the ethics of creativity and others' creations. And that's a very questionable way in which a lot of this AI development has happened. So in contrast to that, I think the Indian approach is that let us motivate people to voluntarily make their data sets available. So that way we do it ethically and we do it the right way, rather than the manner in which these big tech platforms have gone about doing it.
So I think a lot of these big tech platforms and startups in the US have this very break things fast kind of approach to development and innovation. And you think by taking this more cautioned approach and more respectful approach in many ways, we run the risk of falling further behind?
Not really. I don't think so. I think if you look at the Indian use cases, they're quite different, right? We don't need math Olympiad level AI sophistication to be available to all billion Indians, right? That's not even a requirement. What we need is to be able to empower the lowest common denominator in society, so that we break down barriers and we empower them to go about their daily life, their economic activities, whatever that they do, whether it's learning, whether it's transacting, enable them to be more productive, enable them to overcome barriers and challenges. And I think that That kind of AI is really what we need. And that kind of AI, in all likelihood, is something that will reside locally at the edge on a phone, be able to talk multiple Indian languages and enable these guys. And that's probably more important to us than a reasoning model or a language model, which is so sophisticated that requires so much of compute power that it's ridiculously expensive. No $20 per month subscription model will ever work in India.
Absolutely, that's true. But we have seen, like China has been able to do it with like, weaker chips, so to speak. They've been able to develop OpenSea with, with certain restrictions that were put on them by, geopolitics in the US. They're still been able to create a language model of their own. So do you think, you don't think India needs their own language model?
No, it is happening. If you look at as part of the India AI mission, there was a call for proposals that was put out by the government, saying that startups and researchers who are building foundational models for India in the Indian context can apply and will support them. And I think the first two such projects, one from India AI mission and one previously from the Department of Science and Technology, have already been funded. The first one was Bharat Gen from IIT Bombay, which has been funded by the Department of Science and Technology, where they are looking at frugal multimodal models in Indian languages to be able to enable a whole bunch of use cases. The other effort is Sarvam, which comes out of the IIT Madras AI for Bharat initiative. And Sarvam is a startup that was incubated by them. And they've been selected by the India AI mission to build India's sovereign sort of language model. So these are two efforts that are already funded and underway. There are others as well, like IIT Kanpur, for example, where we give them the access to the repository. Then there are a whole bunch of startups. But also the question is, what do we want out of these language models? Right? Is it just translation? Is it just transcription? Is it a knowledge repository? No, maybe there are other ways. And in fact, one of the unique things, you already had Dr. Mohanty on your podcast series. And so there are unique approaches by Indian startups where we are questioning this approach itself of, having a large scale language model that sucks out so many resources. Maybe there are frugal ways and more reliable, more authentic ways to achieve the same objective.
Interesting. As we talk about use cases specific to India, we have some great startups and companies as part of AI4India. Are there any examples of Indian use cases that are being worked upon that you could talk about?
Sure. I think one of the holy grails of using AI in the Indian context is, can we enable the bottom of the pyramid to be able to utilize things like UPI, be able to access their bank accounts and do their basic stuff very easily and smoothly. And I recall one anecdote that I can share. I was going to some TV program at NDTV at Central Car, and it was during peak rush hour in Delhi. And so as a driver, I wanted to use Google Maps and find these, the fastest way to get there. So he said, no, you can't do it. So I asked him, why is it? Is it because your phone is, an older phone, or is it too expensive to have a mobile data plan? What is preventing you from, using? He said, "Mujhse chalaya nahi chahta." That is a very profound sentence that hit me, that we have taken an entire part of our population for granted, right? With these very complex interfaces, which require not only knowledge of English, it requires a certain degree of sophistication to be able to navigate these interfaces. So if we can have AI, make it really simple for people to just speak and interact and get around, their basic tools and basic functions, I think that's a big deal. And those are the kinds of use cases that I see work already happening with Bhashini and so on. And if the Prime Minister has been a pioneer in using new technology, that he was one of the first ones to use Bhashini for having his speeches delivered in multiple Indian languages during the Lok Sabha elections.
Mm-hmm. I think they also used AI for translating his conversation during his recent appearance on the Lex Friedman podcast.
Yeah, Lex Friedman, Bill Gates earlier before that. Mm-hmm. The Lex Friedman is very interesting because not only is it translation, it is also lip syncing and making it look very natural.
I didn't actually know that part.
Yeah. So there are AI models, for example, they can take a recording of your voice and then make you talk in German. and make you talk in French, and then make it look so natural that I can't even tell that it's an AI generated lip sync.
I think maybe we'll try that in one of our podcasts in
Right,
the
sure.
future. See how that comes along.
Yeah, yeah. So that's technology is that.
Oh, wonderful. So, coming back to Datadaan, it's of course become a flagship campaign for AI for India and something you guys have been pioneering very passionately. Do you have any message for the audience on A, why they should get involved, and B, how someone can get involved?
Yeah. Great question, because if you look at what has happened so far with making data sets public, right? There are quite a few government data sets that are already public. The government, as part of the India AI mission, has also created something called AI Kosh repository, where models, data sets, can be accessed. Uh, but I think the need of the hour is much larger and much broader. We can't just stop at public data sets and government data sets. Uh, there are many unique data sets that are available with organizations in India, with businesses, with corporates, with individuals. As simple as your CCTV feed. Maybe you have a CCTV camera sticking out,
Yeah.
looking into your street, right? Uh, is it possible that we have a mechanism by which we can share these data sets with relevant, model developers or researchers without any personal data being shared? And if we can do that, then it's a huge boost to our startups, because then they have access to a very wide, diverse set of content for the model to learn from. And more importantly, we are empowering our startups to compete with the Western, because the Western models don't have the Indian context. So any model that is coming from abroad has that gap. So if our startups have to compete, they have to have a level playing field. The way we are able to do that is if we are able to give them access to these unique data sets, so they will have something unique advantage over the big guys in the West.
Makes sense. So I think one other thing that I think the audience would want to know is, how do you see the system evolving, the ecosystem evolving over the next couple of years? Where do you see maybe in 10 years the AI ecosystem here in India kind of reaching?
Interesting question. So I think one obvious thing that we are already seeing, right, that talent-wise, India is the largest talent. So there's already an explosion of people trying to acquire AI skills, and so that they can compete for whatever are the AI-enabled jobs that will come down the road. So that's the most obvious phenomenon that we are seeing playing out, and that will play out for another decade, because the technology is fast changing. Models are getting updated every day. There's new architectures coming up. Now there's agentic architecture. There's new protocols. All kinds of new things happening. Because there is such a fast-paced innovation, it is very challenging to keep your skills up to date. So that is one phenomenon: skilling and enabling the talent pool to be up to date on these AI skills. The second thing is, it's not enough to just make data sets public. We have to make these data sets AI friendly and AI usable, and that requires a lot of annotations, a lot of enrichment to make the model understand what this data is about. So that is another area of opportunity where value-added services, just like we had IT outsourcing, BPO, knowledge outsourcing. I think these data enrichment services could be a area of opportunity, and I think that is something that will happen. It's already started to happening when there are a couple of startups which are already doing that. I think it can become a much bigger phenomenon. The third thing is, of course, AI making its way into Indian enterprises, Indian corporates, where it starts to make a difference to them in terms of productivity, their operations, their strategy, and so on. And that is a more complex process, and that will require tools which are enterprise scale and enterprise ready. Not necessarily the hype that we're seeing with generative AI and language models. It will require deep domain knowledge. We'll need to understand, the intricacies of manufacturing, intricacies of process industry, and so on, supply chains. Only then, those AI models can be effective in that enterprise context, and they can deliver those productivity gains and improvements. Right. So that's the third sort of phenomenon. To public areas where I think AI will make a huge impact in India, and I think it is something that can help us leapfrog. Is on the education side and on the government services, public services side. On the education side, we have this entire platform that has been created for open education through MOOCs on the internet and so on. But it's a one size fit all approach, right? Your learning ability may be very different from mine, right? So why should both of us have the same learning journey? What if AI is able to, understand your abilities to learn and knows the differences in my ability to learn, and then the entire online MOOCs course is adapted to suit your learning, pace and the manner in which you will learn.
So personalization of education.
Personalization to a degree where uh, you know uh, it is with you helping you at every step of the way, right? And I think that is a big challenge. And in India, you have this. We don't have, because of our population being so large and so diverse. It's very difficult to have the same quality of teaching at every level, right? And which is why you will see certain teachers who are very popular. They have their tuitions, and they have become brands by themselves, and so on. An industry, sort of industry by themselves, right? But the benefits of their teaching abilities is limited to a very small segment, and then it's again a one size fit all approach, right? So can AI learn from these excellent teachers and then take the benefits of teaching to a much larger population so that we can scale it at this billion scale? So education is one. Second is on public services, especially healthcare. Same issue, right? You have few good doctors who are again concentrated in few places.
Yeah.
But take just radiology, for example. I believe in India, the population of radiologists, certified radiologists, is so small that they're all concentrated in the bigger towns and cities. So if you want an X-ray to be done in a smaller town or city, I believe it has to be looked at by someone in somewhere else, some other physical location. Right? Now, can you use AI to automate that or bring down that barrier? Same thing with your Anganwadi workers. Right? When they go out to the remote areas to provide the, they are the first line of defense as far as public health is concerned. Can you enable them with AI in their language and edge based, because they may not have internet connectivity, they may not have a whole lot of bandwidth. So can we bring intelligence to the edge, and can we empower teachers, health workers? Can we bring down barriers in, let's say, a municipal office, a driving license school? I think those are the use cases that will matter. And I think in the next 10 years, if we can do that, that is where we get ahead of, the other countries, and, we lead from. Good.
I think that's fascinating to see, and I think everyone's excited to see, what the road ahead has for us on the AI journey. Just one more question from my side. You mentioned that we can leapfrog by doing certain things. But do you think that there's any particular competitive advantage that we have over other nations on the AI front that will allow us to kind of, further leapfrog in terms of the technology?
Well, I think the biggest advantage that we have is the talent pool and the diversity. Right. So you have talent pool which is world class, and no wonder when you go to Silicon Valley, any of the cutting edge industries, it is largely people of Indian origin.
But do you think there's a brain drain element also there? Like our best
Well, I think
brain
brain drain to me was older phenomenon. Now I'm seeing a different phenomenon playing out where if you build technology in India, you can scale it anywhere in the world. Because in India, you have the first world. I'm sure you must have seen that Indus Valley report.
Yes.
Right. It talks of different segments. You practically can test any technology, any product, both at the niche premium level, which is almost as good as any developed society, and at the mass level, which is relevant to any of the global south.
Yeah.
Right. So today, a lot of technology is getting created in India with this global context in mind, and not just I'm talking about Indian startups. A lot of the big techs, they have their GCCs, they have their development centers in India, and this is not much talked about. So in the public domain, so we don't know about it. But for example, a lot of the Google's Gemini work and DeepMind, a lot of that is actually happening in Bangalore. If you build technology in India, you can scale it anywhere over. Because in India, you have the first world. I'm sure you must have seen that Indus Valley report.
Yes.
Right? It talks of different segments. You practically can test any technology, any product, both at the niche premium level, which is almost as good as any developed society, and at the mass level, which is relevant to any of the global south, right? So today, the a lot of technology is getting created in India. Is actually happening in India.
Yeah, I think future is bright on that front. I think as long as our talent is able to kind of focus on the problems that originate here and solve for them, I think we'll definitely be able to meet the vision that we all have for AI. So as we wrap this up, any thoughts that you want to leave with the audience with about AI or about localized data or about AI for India? Anything you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I think the it's a unique moment in history for us to build technology in India. A lot of factors have aligned. In fact, the most recent crisis, COVID, of course, was a wake-up call on why we needed to do indigenous technology, and that's why the Prime Minister, gave this call for Atmanirbhar Bharat. And then most recent, of course, Operation Sindoor has shown us why it is so important to have indigenous technologies.
Absolutely.
And the only way indigenous technologies will get developed in India is if there is patient capital and the ecosystem allows for a culture of experimentation, innovation, disruption, right? And this has to happen at all levels, all the way starting from the schools to the universities, the labs, and it requires public-private collaboration. And I think that is the kind of environment that we need to see. So I would say, if you are a researcher, you're a model, you're a teacher, or you're a student, or you're in government, think of how you can become an enabler of this, movement, where we see more and more deep tech and indigenous technologies emerging out of it.
Wonderful. I think that's a great message to leave our audience with. Thank you so much for taking the time also. And thank you so much to all the viewers for tuning in. Stay tuned to the AI for India podcast for more conversations on everything artificial intelligence.